Within the first month, Sarah discovered that Victoria's afternoon tea visits were just the beginning. Twice more that week, she came home to find evidence that someone had been in her garden, pruned flowers, missing garden tools rearranged, and once her prized antique watering can moved to a different spot. Sarah installed a simple decorative fence with a gate that locked. Nothing unfriendly, just a clear boundary. The following weekend, she found the latch mysteriously broken. "You know, dear," said Mrs. Jenkins, her elderly neighbor from across the street, "Victoria did the same thing to the Thompsons before you, claimed some sort of view easement that doesn't exist. They were too tired to fight her. Sarah wasn't too tired to fight." Years of handling difficult situations in the hospital had given her a backbone of steel beneath her gentle demeanor. When she confronted Victoria again, the woman was hosting a small gathering of ladies in Sarah's garden, complete with a portable tea service. "Ah, Sarah. Ladies, this is our new neighbor," Victoria announced with false warmth. "Sarah's a nurse at the hospital, isn't that dedicated?" The women, all dressed in expensive casual wear and perfect makeup, smiled politely but looked uncomfortable. "Victoria, I've asked you not to use my garden without permission," Sarah said firmly but politely. "I'd appreciate it if you and your guest would leave now." "We're just finishing up," Victoria replied, not moving. "Besides, this garden has been part of our garden club meetups for years. Surely you don't want to upset the neighborhood. Tradition's your very first month here." One of the ladies stood up, gathering her purse. "Actually, I should be going. Victoria, you didn't mention this was a private garden." As the impromptu gathering reluctantly dispersed, Victoria lingered. "You know you're not making this easy on yourself. I'm on the board of the Homeowners Association. I know people at City Hall. This could all be so much simpler if you'd just be accommodating." The following week, Sarah received an officially notice from the Homeowners Association about substandard garden maintenance and unapproved fence installation. The fine was $500. When Sarah attended the HOA meeting to dispute the citation, she discovered Victoria wasn't just on the board, she was the president. The fine was upheld by a narrow margin. "You see how things work here?" Victoria said afterward, voice low enough that only Sarah could hear. "This can continue, or you can be reasonable about sharing your garden." Sarah returned home disheartened but determined. That night, she sat on her porch with a cup of tea, watching the fireflies dance around her contested garden. She had worked too hard for this small piece of paradise to surrender it now. The memories of her late husband Charles came flooding back, how they dreamed of a garden like this during those early years of marriage when they lived in a tiny apartment above a noisy street. "You would have loved these moonflowers, Charlie," she whispered. "And you wouldn't have let that woman push you around either." The next morning, Sarah called the county records office and requested copies of her property survey and deed. If Victoria wanted to play hardball, Sarah would come prepared. 3 days later, when she returned from her shift at the pediatric ward, Sarah found 3 women in her garden taking photographs of her flowers. "Excuse me?" Sarah called out, still, in her nurse's scrubs. "This is private property." A woman with ash blonde hair turned, lowering her expensive camera. "Oh, we're with Victoria's Garden Club. She said it was fine for us to take reference photos for our annual competition." "I'm afraid Victoria doesn't have the authority to grant that permission," Sarah explained, trying to keep her voice pleasant despite her exhaustion. "I'm Sarah Wilson, the owner of this property." The women exchanged glances. "But Victoria said—" "I'm sure she did," Sarah interrupted gently. "But she's mistaken. Now, if you'd like to schedule a time to photograph the garden with my permission, I'd be happy to discuss that. But right now, I need to ask you to leave." As the garden club members hurriedly packed up their equipment, one of them paused. "I'm sorry, we didn't realize Victoria was quite insistent that this was a community space." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. She tends to be insistent about many things. The following Saturday, Sarah was at the local garden center purchasing supplies when her phone chimed with an alert from the security app she'd installed. The grainy image showed Victoria, not just in her garden, but actively cutting Sarah's prized David Austin roses, placing them carefully in a basket. Sarah abandoned her shopping cart and drove home seething. When she arrived, Victoria was gone, but the damage was done. Nearly a dozen of her best blooms had been cut, leaving unsightly gaps in her carefully tended rose bushes. That evening, a beautifully arranged bouquet of Sarah's own roses was prominently displayed in Victoria's front window, visible to anyone passing by. The garden battle escalated further when Victoria's landscaping service showed up unannounced one Tuesday morning, claiming they had been instructed to trim the hedges and treat the lawn on Sarah's property. "Ma'am, we have standing instructions from Mrs. Harrington to maintain this garden every other Tuesday," the foreman explained, clearly confused by Sarah's objection. "This is not Mrs. Harrington's property," Sarah explained firmly. "Please, make a note in your records that you are not authorized to perform any services here without my explicit permission." The landscaper looked embarrassed. "She's been having us work here for years. The previous owners never said anything." "Well, I'm saying something now," Sarah replied. That afternoon, Sarah returned from grocery shopping to find a notice taped to her front door. Another citation from the Homeowners Association. This time for refusing professional maintenance, services necessary to maintain neighborhood standards. The final straw came during the Garden District's annual Charity Week. Sarah arrived home to find a tour group of nearly 20 people being led through her garden by none other than Victoria herself. "And these hydrangeas have been a fixture of the garden for over 60 years, Victoria was saying as Sarah approached. "I personally ensure they're properly—" "Excuse me," Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying clearly across the garden. The tour group turned as one to stare at her. "This is private property, and this tour is not authorized." Victoria's smile froze, but she recovered quickly. "Sarah, dear, this is the annual charity garden tour. We've been doing this for decades. All proceeds go to children's literacy, a wonderful cause." Sarah agreed, "But you didn't ask permission to include my garden, and I did not agree to participate." A murmur ran through the tour group. An elderly gentleman in a seersucker suit stepped forward. "Is this not part of the official tour?" "No, sir, it is not," Sarah said firmly. "This is my private garden." Victoria's face flushed with anger and embarrassment as the tour participants began to shuffle awkwardly toward the gate. "You'll regret this," Victoria hissed as she passed Sarah on her way out. "Nobody crosses me in this neighborhood." That night, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by property documents, HOA bylaws, and printouts of local ordinances. The battle for her garden had consumed too much of her energy, but she refused to back down. "There has to be a way to make this stop," she muttered, rubbing her tired eyes. Her phone rang. It was her colleague from the hospital, Mabel, who had become her closest friend since moving to Charleston. "How's the garden situation?" Mabel asked after they'd chatted. "About work," Sarah sighed. "Getting worse. Today she brought an entire tour group through my garden without permission." "That woman needs to learn a lesson," Mabel declared. "And if the authorities won't help, maybe it's time for some creative problem solving." "What do you mean?" "Well," Mabel said slowly, "my brother-in-law is a security consultant. He might have some ideas about how to document these invasions properly." The seed of an idea began to form in Sarah's mind. Throughout her nursing career, she'd learned that sometimes the most effective treatments weren't the most obvious ones. "Mabel," Sarah said, a new resolution in her voice, "I think it's time to take a different approach. Victoria wants to use my garden so badly. Perhaps I should make sure her next visit is truly memorable." Sarah's solution came from an unexpected source. Her best friend Mabel, a retired art teacher with a lifetime of experience handling difficult personalities at the local high school. "You need to document everything," Mabel advised over coffee. On Sarah's porch, the morning sun casting dappled shadows through the cherry tree. "Build your case methodically, just like you document a patient's symptoms." That weekend, Sarah installed discreet security cameras around her garden, carefully, positioning them to record any trespassing. The small devices, nearly invisible among the foliage, gave her a strange comfort, silent witnesses to the truth. Within days, she had compiled a revealing collection of Victoria's unauthorized visits. The footage showed a pattern more calculated than Sarah had realized. Victoria had a routine. She deliberately chose times when Sarah's car was gone, signaling her hospital shifts. She always guided visitors to the same antique bench beneath the wisteria, presenting the view as if it were her own creation. "Look at how she's measuring distances," Mabel observed, squinting at Sarah's laptop screen. "She's planning something specific." Through gentle conversations with Mrs. Jenkins and other neighbors, Sarah learned something crucial. Victoria was planning her annual Garden District benefit at her home, a high society fundraiser that attracted Charleston's elite. For years, it had been her crowning social achievement. "She's advertising spectacular garden views on the invitations," Mrs. Jenkins confided, her weathered hands wrapped around a teacup. "Everyone knows she means your garden, dear." The previous owners had always let her use it for her event, though they were never actually invited to attend. Sarah sat quietly absorbing this information, the weight of it settling in her chest. This wasn't just about entitlement anymore. It was about Victoria taking credit for someone else's beauty, someone else's hard work. That evening, as twilight softened the edges of her garden, Sarah watched a hummingbird hover near her salvia. The tiny creature, so delicate yet so determined, reminded her of patients she'd cared for, those who appeared fragile but possessed remarkable resilience. "Sometimes," she murmured to herself, "the gentlest souls need the strongest boundaries." The idea came to her as she was cleaning her antique garden bench, the one Victoria always claimed during her uninvited visits. Sarah paused, cloth in hand, a memory surfacing from her nursing days. The non-toxic, skin-safe glitter they had used for the children's ward celebration last year. It had been remarkably persistent, clinging to everything it touched. She remembered how little Sophia B., battling leukemia, had giggled with delight at her sparkly hands. "Look, Nurse Sarah, I'm magic now." The glitter had remained visible for days, a small joy during difficult treatments. Perhaps, Sarah thought, a smile playing at her lips, Victoria deserves a little magic of her own. With careful deliberation, Sarah formulated her plan, not for revenge but for justice. A gentle yet unmistakable reminder that actions have consequences, that boundaries deserve respect. As darkness fell over her contested garden, Sarah felt a sense of peace replace her frustration. Tomorrow, she would prepare her response to Victoria's persistent intrusions, a response that would be impossible to ignore, yet harm no one. "Let's see how Charleston's Queen of Social Graces explains this to her garden benefit guests," Sarah whispered to the fireflies dancing among her roses. The morning sun painted Charleston's historic district in hues of amber and gold as Sarah meticulously prepared her response. With the steady hands that had administered precise doses of medication to countless patients, she carefully applied the special formula to the antique bench. A clear, completely harmless mixture containing cosmetic-grade glitter suspended in an aloe base. "The beauty of this solution," she explained to Mabel during their early morning call, "is that it embodies everything I've learned in nursing. Effective, harmless, and impossible to ignore. Just like the best patient interventions." Sarah stepped back to examine her handiwork. The bench looked exactly as it always had, weathered oak with ornate iron details, sitting serenely beneath the cascading purple wisteria. The formula dried completely clear, invisible to the naked eye but ready to activate with sustained contact and body heat. At the entrance to her garden, Sarah placed a new, unmistakable sign: "Private property, no trespassing." She positioned it deliberately, ensuring it would be visible in any photographs or videos. Then, with the quiet dignity of a woman who had spent decades advocating for those who couldn't speak for themselves, she pretended to leave for her hospital shift, making sure Victoria's curtains twitched as she pulled away. Instead of heading to work, Sarah parked several blocks away and returned through kind Mrs. Jenkins's adjoining yard. The elderly neighbor gave her a conspiratorial wink as Sarah slipped into the small garden shed, settling onto a weathered stool with her tablet connected to the security cameras. "It's high time someone taught that woman about boundaries," Mrs. Jenkins whispered, patting Sarah's shoulder. "My Harold would have loved to see this." The neighborhood held its breath in the late morning stillness, magnolia and jasmine scenting the air as Victoria arrived, precisely on schedule. She emerged through her side gate, dressed in an immaculate white linen suit, a designer ensemble that exuded old money privilege. Against the backdrop of Sarah's lovingly tended cottage garden, Victoria directed the young photographer trailing behind her. "This angle captures the heritage roses perfectly," Victoria instructed. "Make sure you get the church steeple in the background. These photos will feature prominently in the Society magazine's coverage of my benefit." Sarah watched, scarcely breathing, as Victoria positioned herself on the antique bench, arranging her expensive outfit just so, creating the illusion of aristocratic serenity in what she clearly considered her extended domain. "I've maintained this garden view for the neighborhood's enjoyment for years," Victoria told the photographer, who nodded politely. "The proper cultivation of beauty is a responsibility I take very seriously." For nearly 40 minutes, Victoria directed an extensive photo shoot, standing, sitting, pretending to admire flowers she hadn't planted. With each new pose, with every shift of position on the bench, the invisible formula transferred more effectively to her pristine clothing and skin. The midday Charleston humidity activated the aloe base perfectly, ensuring the ultrafine glitter adhered with unexpected thoroughness. "Let's try one more with me seated at the perfect angle to showcase the garden's design elements," Victoria said, smoothing her skirt as she repositioned herself. The photographer frowned slightly as he lowered his camera. "Miss Harrington, there's something unusual happening with the light." Victoria's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "You seem to be glimmering. It's most visible on your skirt and hands." Victoria looked down, her expression transforming from confusion to dawning horror as she finally registered the subtle but unmistakable shimmer now covering her outfit. The pristine white linen captured every sparkle in the sunlight, creating a gentle but impossible to miss glow across her carefully cultivated image. "What is this?" she gasped, frantically brushing at her clothes, which only spread the effect further. Sparkles appeared on her cheeks and jawline. The photographer took an instinctive step backward. Perhaps there was something on the bench. Victoria stood abruptly, her social composure cracking as she realized the extent of her transformation. With growing panic, she turned in a full circle, the sunlight catching different angles of her now shimmering silhouette. In that moment of desperate scanning, Victoria's gaze fixed on the small security camera nestled discreetly among Sarah's hydrangeas, its tiny red light a silent witness to her trespassing. The realization hit her with the force of decades of unchallenged entitlement suddenly meeting its match. Her face torted with fury as she connected the dots, understanding flooding her features with the same inevitability as the glitter now covering her curated persona. "That nurse!" she hissed, her voice trembling with indignation. "She planned this. She knows exactly what today is." As Victoria fled through the garden gate, leaving a subtle trail of sparkles in her wake like an unwilling fairy godmother, Sarah allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Sometimes justice didn't announce itself with thunderous proclamations but arrived silently with a gentle shimmer that transformed everything it touched. And in the quiet of her garden shed, watching as the woman who had dismissed her as just a nurse hurried home trailing evidence of her trespassing, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since moving to Charleston. The deep satisfaction of being truly seen and respected for setting a boundary that mattered. The annual garden district benefit unfolded at Victoria's colonial mansion with its usual pomp and circumstance. Charleston's elite arrived in luxury vehicles, dressed in their finest attire, ready for an evening of charitable giving that doubled as social positioning. What they didn't expect was their hostess greeting them with an unmistakable shimmer. Despite 3 emergency showers and a frantic call to her personal stylist, Victoria Harrington couldn't eliminate the subtle sparkle that clung to her skin and hair. She'd been forced to abandon her white linen suit for a dark navy ensemble that somewhat masked the effect. But under the crystal chandeliers of her grand foyer, she glowed with an ethereal quality that drew confused glances and whispered conversations. "Is Victoria wearing glitter?" murmured Judge Patterson's wife to the bank president's daughter. For the Blossom and Bloom Education Fund? Another guest questioned. Seems rather youthful for the occasion. Victoria's carefully constructed explanation, something about a specialty moisturizer accident, fell flat as guests noticed how the shimmer intensified around her hairline and hands, precisely the places one touches when sitting improperly on someone else's garden bench. The true unraveling came during her welcome speech when Victoria gestured toward her dining room windows with their view of Sarah's garden. "As you can see through our extended landscape vista," Victoria announced, her voice carrying the practiced cadence of generations of social privilege, "we've maintained the neighborhood's historic charm through careful—" "Isn't that the new nurse's garden?" interrupted Mrs. Hollingsworth, an octogenarian whose family had lived in Charleston since before the Civil War. "The one with the lovely hydrangeas?" The room fell silent as Victoria's complexion flushed pink beneath her glittery sheen. The following morning, Sarah attended the Emergency Homeowners Association meeting that Victoria had called, supposedly about vandalism and security concerns. Sarah arrived prepared with her folder of evidence, printed still images from her security footage documenting months of trespassing, along with a flash drive of video evidence. "Before we discuss security concerns," Sarah said calmly, when given the floor, "I'd like to address ongoing trespassing issues affecting private property in our neighborhood." For the next 10 minutes, the association members watched in stunned silence as Sarah methodically presented evidence of Victoria's repeated unauthorized entries to her garden, including clips of Victoria explicitly claiming the garden as her own. "As you can see," Sarah concluded, "I've taken reasonable measures to protect my property, including non-toxic, cosmetic-grade marking substances on my personal garden furniture, similar to what we use in pediatric care to bring joy to children during difficult treatments." Victoria, still faintly sparkling despite her best efforts, sat speechless as the HOA board voted unanimously to rescind Sarah's maintenance fine and issue a formal neighborhood reminder about respecting property boundaries. 2 weeks later, a "for sale" sign appeared in front of Victoria's colonial mansion. Neighborhood gossip reported she had decided to spend more time at their Hilton Head property. Sarah, meanwhile, did something unexpected with her garden. She started a small garden therapy program, inviting fellow healthcare workers to enjoy the peaceful space after stressful shifts. Twice a month, she hosted gentle gardening sessions for seniors from the community center. One warm afternoon, Mrs. Jenkins brought over a homemade blueberry pie as Sarah prepared for her first community garden reading for local children. "You know," Mrs. Jenkins said, settling into a chair beneath the wisteria. "This garden hasn't seen such joy in decades. Those flowers are positively thriving with all the attention they're getting now." Sarah smiled, looking out at the garden that had become a true community space, through invitation and respect, not entitlement. The antique bench still sat in its place of honor. Though thoroughly cleaned, Sarah had kept just a small jar of the glitter mixture, labeled and stored safely away, a reminder that sometimes justice comes with a little extra sparkle. Have you ever faced someone who refused to respect your boundaries? We'd love to hear your stories in the comments below and tell us where you're watching from. Standing up for yourself doesn't require confrontation, just a little creativity and the courage to hold your ground. As Sarah discovered, even the smallest actions can restore balance when done with dignity and purpose. In our communities, respect isn't just a courtesy, it's the foundation of genuine connection. Whether you're the newcomer or a lifelong resident, we all deserve to have our boundaries honored. If this story of quiet resilience and sparkling justice resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share with friends who might need a reminder that they too can protect what matters to them. And remember, in a world that sometimes values status over kindness, be like Sarah, steady, dignified, and willing to stand your ground with grace. Because true community is built on respect, not entitlement. Until next time, from our stories to your heart.